First of all, I want to get away from the dictionary definition of a constitution. A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Ladies and gentlemen, to our viewers in and out of Guyana, welcome to this Globespan program brought to you with the compliments of Globespan 24/7, its supporters, and of course, Mr. Nohar Singh. I want to start tonight by asking our viewers a question. You don't have to answer me right now, but you can send in your answers. I quote, and I'm asking you to identify who said these words. The president is sleepwalking into a constitutional crisis. Viewers and Guyanese at home and abroad, let me get into tonight's program by quoting the Stabroek News, speaking of the government of Guyana. Quote, the incumbent is abusing its incumbency in its bid to be re-elected while defying the Constitution all the way. Stabroek News goes further to note that the government's energies, along with taxpayers' money, have been dissipated on fighting every step of the way to prevent early elections mandated under 1066 and 1067. What is of great importance to many independent minds and onlookers is that the current government of Guyana is setting some very dangerous precedents that can lead us again in the future down this abyss. The blatant abuse of state funds in this period alone, the corruption, erasure of line between party and state, nepotism, cronyism, racism are all the reasons why many fought hard against the last administration, and it certainly brought an end to their reign and power. However, the exact things are what the current government has been doing. Corruption from its inception, and now the incomparable approach to retaining a grip on power. And any attempt to call this current government out for its corruption or its constitutional abuse, their response is one that harks back to the PPP and what the PPP did. Any attempt to call them out for their abuse of laws, their response is to refer to what PPP did. So they're clearly referring to a PPP songbook as the source of their modus operandi. And mind you, as I said, the PPP lost the last general elections. But let us look at the legal framework, the Constitution, the realities facing us. In the CCJ's historic ruling, it concluded that the GCOM's chair appointment was done outside of the law. They did not order that Patterson resign. Instead, it was as though Patterson was never appointed or ought never to have been appointed. Note, they did not order that Patterson resign, but Patterson resigned. Neither did they order that government of Guyana resign. But in the opposite stead to Patterson, government of Guyana is holding on to that sliver of contention that CCJ did not order it out. Yet the CCJ ruled that NCM was valid and therefore elections were due for that event. So based on the information in front of us, the clock runs out on the constitutionality of the government in 2 days. 2 days. We can debate, discuss, do whatever it is we do, but the status of the government as of September 18th is important for many reasons, including setting a precedence for the future. What are the options open to government as of September 18th or September 19th? A lot of persons in civil society wants to know whether Granger and his cabinet are legal, whether their decisions are binding on Guyana, among other things. And here tonight, we want to discuss this matter of constitutionality of the government. We will discuss the Constitution and all matters that point to the status of government of Guyana. We will discuss the question that everybody has been asking since they see us announce this show. Is the government legal or illegal? Are we in a crisis? And what can we do about it? In discussions with numerous persons all over the country and also in those in foreign lands, their opinion is the Constitution has been hijacked and that the president may very well be in contempt of the court. However, it is clear to know that the court made no order unto the president. Tonight, to answer these and other questions that arise from the people's voice, we have the founder and managing partner of Whitworth Chambers and one of Guyana's top legal personality, Mr. Sanjeev Datadin, and another gentleman, Mr. Kamal Ramkarran, who is a respected member of the firm Cameron Shepherd, and who also has been blazing his own trail in the legal field. These two gentlemen have not only chartered their own individual course in this country and in the region, but have also been in the forefront in their open approach towards dissecting and discussing matters relating to the Constitution and the legal framework that Guyana ought to operate within. They have both represented their clients to the CCJ in various challenges to the NCM. Gentlemen, welcome to this Globespan panel discussion in which we discuss the concerns of the people of Guyana. To Sanjeev Datadin and Kamal Ramkarran, welcome to you both, sirs.
Thank you, Yog. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening to you. Good evening to all your viewers.
Thank you. If we can just get into it.
Pleasure is mine.
Great. If we can just get into it. And before we go to the discussion on the impending D-Day, that is September 18th, I would like if you both can address your minds to some smaller but important questions sent in by the viewers. Question: is the president of Guyana bound to obey the laws and constitution of Guyana? It sounds like a silly question, but people are feeling, or they have been hearing, that the president has something called presidential immunity. Does this make him immune from constitutional breach?
If I could go first on that one,
Sure.
The simple answer to it is no. Constitution is supreme in Guyana, as with similar Caribbean territories. The Constitution is paramount. Obedience to the Constitution is required by everyone. The immunities that the president enjoys are really related to civil liabilities and criminal liabilities, meaning that anything he does while he's in the office of president, you couldn't sue him directly for. But the obedience of the Constitution is still paramount. The interesting thing arises as to whether or not that immunity will relate to a contempt, meaning the disobedience of an order of court. My view is that it does not extend to the disobedience of an order of court, and it could not extend because of how it was framed. It was really framed and designed so that whatever he did as president, he enjoyed immunity. It's a different position if a judge would have said that you are to do X, and he then chooses not to do X. Is the judge, therefore, unable to do anything to enforce that?
Correct.
I would think that the immunity does not extend that far.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments, Kamal?
Well, I would say, as Sanjeev said, that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Article 8 of the Constitution, Yoga, I know you're familiar with it. Article 8 of the Constitution says, this Constitution is the supreme law of Guyana, and if any other law is inconsistent with it, that law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. Well, that deals with laws, but it makes it clear that the Constitution of Guyana is the supreme law of Guyana. As I've been saying over and over in courts and otherwise, The Constitution is our rule book. It tells us what we have to do and how we have to do it. So everybody is bound by it. The entire country is bound by it. It's the country's guidebook or rule book or operating manual. So the
That's right.
Constitution says what has to happen and how it has to happen. And we are all from top to bottom bound by it. And that is what the rule of law is. The rule of law is that every person, no matter how high you are or how low you are bound by the laws of the country. And the Constitution is the leading law in the country. So we're all bound by it. The president is bound by it, I am bound by it, and you're bound by it.
Thank you. So let's look at the matter of, I don't know if you would want to call this under the term redress, but let's look at the matter of, okay, so the president and everybody is bound to the supreme constitution, the supreme organ. The question is, how can the people of Guyana or any country hold the government accountable, responsible for failure to abide by this law, other than having their ability to express their right every 5 years at election time? How can we hold the government firmly to follow the Constitution? What recourse do people have?
The usual thing, civilized societies have established judicial systems. The purpose of judicial systems are to resolve disputes. The purpose of a judge in a public law matter where there is a constitutional review taking place is to direct that public official, whoever he be, whether he be a minister of government, a simple civil servant, or the president, to direct his conduct. Now, regrettably, Guyana has had a history whereby the courts have not supported breaches that were obvious. It is a fact that there were elections before in Guyana that were rigged. It is a fact that they went to the courts. Those courts did not protect the people. Those courts did not uphold the Constitution. They've all now, hopefully these are different times. That is the hope, that they are different times now. And judges must do so. We recently had a case that about less than a week ago that went to the Court of Sessions in Scotland, where the English Prime Minister is or wants to prorogue Parliament. Now, his reason for proroguing Parliament appears to be to prevent the members of the Parliament from passing laws that prevents a no-deal Brexit from happening.
Correct.
Something that is very important in England, and Brexit is very controversial in the United Kingdom. But the court said if it appears that his motives are not clear, or that his motives are not good motives, that they were entitled to strike it down, and that's their head, that's their prime minister. And that's when a court is standing between executive abuse and the people.
Correct.
Because you can't get to the reins of leadership and then do what you want. That could not happen in any civilized society.
That's
Our
right.
difficulty here is perhaps our courts are not doing enough, and our courts are not taking the limits to their power to where it should be done to protect the people. We have courts saying that they will not tell the president what to do. It's not that you're telling him what to do. It's that you're telling him to obey the Constitution that he swore to uphold. And courts have a duty, above all else, to protect the Constitution. From me, from you, from presidents, from ministers. They must protect the Constitution.
Correct.
And in my mind, for you to say that you're not going to tell them what to do, and you're not going to dictate terms to them, it's really a cop-out. You're shying away from what your duties are, and you're shying away from what your responsibilities as a judge should be.
Correct. So let me ask you this. In paragraph 8 of the judgment, CCJ said explicitly, quote, the government is expected to behave during this interim period as a caretaker. So give us now, layman, you're talking to layman here. Tell us what explicitly does it say?
Well, a caretaker government is exactly what it sounds like. It's not government as usual. It doesn't mean that because you have passed a budget and a budget has been approved for you to build a bridge or build a road or do those things that you continue and you embark upon the award of contracts for that. What it means as caretaker government is everyday government functions must continue. You have civil servants to pay.
Correct.
You have to make sure that that is done. You have services to provide to your citizens. You have to make sure that those are done.
Right.
But you should go no further. In fact, in Canada, there is an entire, I don't want to say regulation, but there is an entire policy that has legislative effect that spells out that when a caretaker government is in place, this is what you can do and this is what you cannot do. We don't have that here, but Canada's position is akin to the common law. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you can't do is you can't enter third-party contracts that are not necessary. You see, if you understand the background a little bit of it, it will be clear. Mm-hmm. Much is said in Guyana recently about the doctrine of necessity. It's being misapplied, in my mind, because necessity can't be self-inflicted. We're saying that all these things are going on, but we're not, and we're saying that out of necessity we must do this.
Right.
But I believe that the problem is quite simple. You hold an election and the next government will take us forward, whoever that government be.
So thank you for that, because indeed last Wednesday we had a discussion, and former Prime Minister of Trinidad, Basdeo Panday, said that for us to really be in its true sense of democratic state and to have reasonableness or force reasonableness into the politicians, the Constitution needs to be amended so that certain things become very clear in it. Come on, let me ask you this question. On the same kind of topic, what can the people do when the powers that be fail to observe due process or fail to be in compliance with the law? Now, I want to take a step back. 1 second. Let me tell you the context in which I would like you to address this. I want to take a step back. When Moses Nagamoto and David Granger took to the media saying they will observe the democratic process after the passing of the NCM, that was before this whole question about 33 not being a majority of 65. I repeat, they were on record saying that they will abide by the Constitution following the NCM. That was 22nd of December 2018. GCOM ought to have been spurred into action since then. Now, president aside, everybody else, government aside, GCOM's mandate, and if they do not do per their mandate, what redress, what recourse is there for the people of Guyana? Again, do we just go back to the courts and get locked down again to a long process?
Well, we have to keep going to court. People have to keep going to court. People have to show that there must be consequences to actions in whatever way they can show that. Because if the government does not obey the Constitution, then if people do nothing about it, that shows that it's fine. They can go ahead and not obey the Constitution doesn't matter. But if people show that they are not going to accept this kind of behavior, that there are consequences to actions, then we will be getting somewhere. Now, if you recall in December they said that the GCOM also said, the PR person said that they were ready and they would do it. They could do it.
Yes.
And that was part of the evidence that was before the CCJ. But really and truly, it's not GCOM who has to do anything. The president of Guyana is the person who decides when elections are called. So Article 61 of the Constitution says, elections shall be held on such day as the president shall appoint by proclamation within 3 months of every dissolution of parliament. It's not GCOM that sets the date. GCOM doesn't decide when elections are in this country. The president of Guyana decides when elections are to be held. So this running away that GCOM is responsible, GCOM is holding us back, I don't think that that's accurate. It's only one person in this country who has the authority to set elections, and that is the president of Guyana.
Okay.
If the president says elections have to be held, what will GCOM say? We can't hold it because of what reason? Now, we had elections last November. We all know that there were elections. There were no complaints about those elections. They ran smoothly. So what is it that GCOM can say that is holding back elections from being held?
So come on, let's follow that up to you both with another question. That is, if, let us just say, if tomorrow morning President Granger comes out and say, look, elections will be held on 30th of November 2019, and GCOM then comes out and say, well, we can't hold it. What happens then?
Well,
there,
you see,
there has to be accountability. There has to be accountability. Why can't they hold it? The public must know exactly what the problems are. Now, the only problem with holding elections in this country is money. Money can solve every problem that has to do with elections. So what other problems can there be? You have to print ballot papers. You have to do certain things within certain time. You have to train staff, pay staff, and get equipment and material. So there's only one thing that could hold elections back, and that is the provision of money. And as far as I'm aware, Parliament has provided GCOM with a great deal of money, billions of dollars.
Sanjeev, any addition there?
The issue is this. There's a process. What is the process when there is a no confidence motion that moving forward? The Constitution is clear. Everybody in Guyana knows. Within 3 months, you have to have an election. What happens for you to have an election? The president must dissolve Parliament, and he must proclaim by a proclamation. He dissolves Parliament, and he says this is the date that the nation will go to an election. The Constitution also provides that if he names a date, and that date is for some reason the Elections Commission is unable to be ready to hold an election on that day, then they must say so. They must state their reasons. And Kamal is right. They have to say why they're not ready. Now, in addition to GCOM being the body or the entity that has to deliver these elections, their say-so only arises once the president does what he's supposed to do. It is unfortunate that the president and political operatives and spin doctors are trying to tell the nation over and over that we got to get from GCOM first. They publish all these old newspaper settings, all these old newspaper clippings that said previous presidents consulted with GCOM as to when a date would be ready. There were different circumstances. In many of those instances, continuous registration, which is now by law, was not taking place. We had to do these house to house, which take lots of time and money. And there was no confidence motion then. You see, a president upon being elected has 5 years, and he could leisurely determine a no confidence motion is intended to say, we have no confidence in you. You must now go to the election. But but he can't then sit down and decide. And which was the GCOM that told him that they weren't ready? His unilaterally appointed chairman.
Correct.
So these things are transparent. We can't argue them as if they're worthy of consideration. 33 is a majority of 65. These are silly things.
So let me ask you another question, and we will take a short break immediately after this question is discussed. So the president, as of today even, has reiterated his position that he is not going to call elections until he is so advised of that date from GCOM. Now, is he then putting former Madam Justice on a spot? And should the chairman of GCOM now come out and say, listen, you set your date and we will work towards it? Is there a platform for GCOM to come out and disassociate themselves with the president's backpedaling on this issue?
Well, if there is a place for them to do so, yes. But GCOM traditionally would not want to get into the fray in a manner that they feel will affect their abilities moving forward in speaking with the parties. So my guess is that nothing will actually come of that. But the people mustn't be fooled, man. You see what happens, you repeat that you have to get the permission of GCOM. You don't need them. The Constitution says that you must dissolve Parliament and you must have by a proclamation. So you say, I do hereby declare Parliament and I name this date to be the date for elections. A simple document. Proclamation is just all the old titles that relate. But he must do what the Constitution demands.
Thank you. Any thoughts? Sorry, any thoughts?
Yes, Yog. The president runs the country, not GCOM. I've scoured the Constitution looking for that power that GCOM has to fix elections. The Constitution says, Article 6.2 says, elections shall be independently supervised. Just supervised. The process of elections are supervised by GCOM. Article 162.1a says that GCOM exercises general direction, supervision over registration, and administrative conduct of elections. That is the purpose of GCOM. GCOM carries off elections in the country. GCOM runs the procedures and manages elections. The government decides when elections are to be held generally, but in this case, they can't decide when elections are to be held because the Constitution tells us when we should have had elections. We should have had elections before last March, without an extension. So we have now gone far, far past March. September the 18th is 3 months after the CCJ's decision. So this motion was validly passed.
Gentlemen, let's come back to let's go for a little break, and when we resume, we're going to head straight into September 18th. Devin, over to you for a little break.
L'Amour is helping to sponsor Globespan 24/7 programs. L'Amour will be celebrating Diwali on board the Princess Luxury Yacht with a cruise on October 19th at 6:30 p.m. Take a cruise down the Hudson with non-stop Diwali celebrations plus DJ and fashion show. Tickets start from $75. That's a Diwali cruise on board the Princess Yacht on October 19th at 6:30 p.m. Call Angeli at 845-545-9936 or Shika at 646-732-0065.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we are back on live. Let's come to September 18th. And just before I open the floor to our two gentlemen to talk about it, I just want to put something else in perspective. If we can take a step back, the president's unilateral selection of Patterson was foreshadowed by his statement. I'm not quoting him, but basically this is what he said, that he did not trust the legal advice of the Chief Justice, who had advised him that he needed to go a particular direction and appointment of the GCOM chairman. It's anyone's guess whose advice he took in terms of selecting Patterson. But then again, since then, again and again, the opinion of even the highest court seemed not to matter to him. So, gentlemen, what are the options leading up to day after tomorrow? Will the government be illegal as of September 19th, purely based on Constitution? Sanjeev, you addressed already the matter of business, but whether it's business as usual, but let's go into it some more. And specifically, if we can talk to two things. One is the legality or illegality. But, Sanjeev, I'm going to ask you to talk about this one. If the government is illegal, what does it mean? What does it mean for a government to be illegal? And what does it mean to the population to come to the world at large? And Kamal, I'm going to ask you to come in terms of if cabinet is not resigned, the decision making, how locked into the contracts they are signing is Guyana into the future? Over to you, Sanjeev.
Yog, before I tell you about my views as relates to illegal or illegal, it's important that in the last discussion we were having about GCOM and the power GCOM has to date, you know, the Constitution 162, while Kamal was speaking, I had a glance at it. It says that it is only on the ground of hardship. If they can't meet the date, there must be hardship for them to say another date has to be fixed.
Okay.
So the president must name it. But if we look at it in very simple terms as to legality, when there's an election, a government is elected, all the persons in government, president of government is elected. When they're elected, they are clothed with power from the Constitution and the statutes, which permit them to do the things that they're doing.
That's right.
Then we had a no confidence motion. A no confidence motion says that your reign will come to an end within 3 months because that's when they name the election. it also said that Parliament, by a 2/3 majority, can extend its life. And so it provides that failing this 2/3 majority, this is what happens.
Yes.
So we have passed that date on March 21st. That has not happened. We had litigation that went all the way to the Caribbean Court of Justice that says that this provision is clear. We don't need to pronounce on it because it says elections within 3 months. We don't need to tell you what to do or count your 3 months for you. That's what the court said when they said that it was clear.
Correct.
Now, with that going on and that process still going on, the court said, we must take into consideration that you should have had this election following a valid no confidence motion last December. So you should now act to do so. Now, it was a reasonable thing that you take that the motion became valid, if you want to say again, because remember the Court of Appeal went the other way. So the motion became effective and everybody knows. And that's why the judgment says we have declared it from which there is no appeal. So you could take this as the final word, is what the court is saying to you.
Correct.
Which means September 18th is approaching. Now, there is no extension by the Parliament. Their powers have not, and the CCJ said they are a caretaker. Mm-hmm. So the limit, cabinet must resign. You see, these things are not intended to harass a government or to put them in a difficult position. It's intended to take away from them executive authority, to diminish their capacity to govern as if they were an elected entity, because the circumstances have changed. And it is all designed to start narrowing your powers so that what you do is you do what you're supposed to do, which is hold the election. These transparent attempts to pretend that this narrowing is somehow unfair, is somehow you're above it because you're in government or you're a president and you don't have to obey it. These are all transparent attempts to simply delay what the law requires that you do.
Correct.
So as they are, if the government is legal, if I could turn it around, I would say I haven't found any constitutional provision, but maybe someone in government has, that what constitutional provision or legal provision can you point to that empowers this government to continue the way they are? Mm-hmm. I can't find any. So the reason I say they are illegal is because you can't imply the power of a government. Lord Hoffman was very clear about that in a decision of Belize Telecom against the Belize government. You can't imply a constitutional provision when a clear framework is set up. And a clear framework is set up. When you think about it, the framers of our Constitution have many shortcomings, but in this case, they said 3 months for you to hold your election. But if you need more time, you need to get 2/3 of the Parliament to do it, failing which you have to come to an end.
Thank you. Okay, so Kamal, let's go to the and these questions, they relate to, as Sanjeev rightly put it, it doesn't aim to limit a particular government. Any government of Guyana is expected to follow the Constitution. But let's talk about the contracts. And Kamal, if I can ask you to put your mind back to even not just contracts that are signed by cabinet or signed by the government, but even if there are any bills that would have been passed after NCM 2018. Over to you, Kamal.
Before I speak about contracts and bills, I'd like to look a little bit at what Sanjeev was talking about, if that's fine with you.
Sure.
Rather than looking at the government as being legal or illegal, another way to look at it is democratic and undemocratic. Now, after the passage of no confidence motion, we should have had elections. We did not have elections. Elections should have been within 3 months unless there was an extension. There were no elections, there was no extension. Cabinet should have resigned. Now, cabinet resigning is not just a technicality. Cabinet is defined by Article 106 of the Constitution. It says that the cabinet is comprised of certain people, the president, prime minister, vice presidents, ministers as are appointed to it. And it says what cabinet does. Cabinet is accountable to parliament for the, if I can just get up, cabinet is accountable to parliament, shall be collectively responsible to parliament for the general direction and control of the government of Guyana, and shall aid and advise the president in the general direction and control of the government of Guyana. So cabinet is something specific. Now, in a country where cabinet has resigned, a cabinet with those functions, you sort of have a lame duck government, something that goes along with elections in 3 months. What we have had, on the other hand, is that the cabinet has continued in full force. They're doing everything that they would have done before the no confidence motion was passed. And it continues. Government continues indefinitely. There's no end in sight. There are no elections in sight. So if they don't go to elections, we will continue like this until some point in time the president decides we should have elections. Now, if your cabinet is lawfully supposed to resign and you are lawfully supposed to have elections, neither of those things happen, then who is to say that at some point in the future, someone could say, well, all those of you people who knew that this was the position, because this is clear, this is not settled in ambiguous language or some sort of language that you can find loopholes in. This is very, very clear and simple English. Who's to say that knowing that this was the position, you went ahead and signed all of these contracts, knowing that they could have been set aside later on? Who's to say that later on they will not be set aside? I'm not saying courts will look very carefully at what happened and what the entire situation before setting anything aside. But surely there is a risk and a danger that contracts could be set aside. And of course, it gets worse the further away we go. The CCJ only gave a respite, as Sanjeev said. They said, all right, while all of this was happening, the Court of Appeal said that the motion was valid, so there was a pause. But that pause came to an end, and as Sanjeev said, the court said there is no appeal from our decision. So, and they sort of implied that the Constitution is now on track. Elections must be held in 3 months unless there is an extension. There has been no extension, there have been no elections, and we go on indefinitely.
Correct. So one of our viewers has sent a question. What about can the board limits being raised after December 21? And that goes to exactly what you were saying there, Kamala.
Well, the tender board, does the cabinet have the power? Is this something that can happen? Did they have the power to do so?
Right. So let's come back to September 19th then. It's 3 days away from now. And Sanjeev, what's your thoughts? I mean, the president, today he said he's not going to set a date for elections. It might be by some miracle that between today and tomorrow, Chico might advise him on a date. But if that doesn't happen, then September 19th, what is going to happen? How do you, from the legal framework of the presidency, as Guyana operating then? Because the government will continue in place. And Sanjeev, one more question for you on this specific thing. A lot of people seem to have the perception that the president becomes illegal, and I think the president's position as president is not a matter of legality, as you rightly said, or illegality. It's a matter of president needs to be there until a new president is sworn in. But then there comes that gray area that we are talking about.
Well, put it this way. If we are to say, as Kamal has gone through, the cabinet is gone, parliament is gone, we're now left with the president. What exactly are the powers that the president should properly be exercised? He's a lame duck president. I know people don't like the phrase, but these things have past history and meaning. So that's one of it. The second thing we have to look at, though, Yog, is this. I hope tomorrow your miracle occurs and we have something that says that this is what will happen going forward. But if we look at the whole thing as to what happens, the president has to not only deal with contractors and business, he has to deal with other countries, he has to deal with other entities. After the 18th, what and how can he deal with them? And my answer to that will be, what can he find in any law? What can he find in the written constitution that we have that authorizes him to continue to deal with whatever the entity, international, local, commercial, whichever he chooses? Is there anything, because this is how laws work, they underpin, protect, and direct conduct.
Correct.
So what would the president himself be able to say, well, there is this provision of the Constitution? I am certain that if you were to raise it, what everybody will say is the doctrine of necessity will say that he has to continue. But this is self-inflicted necessity. It must come to an end. Now, it's my view that what will happen on the 18th when the time runs out, the caretaker government status, which the CCJ spoke of, is going to even get worse. A constitutional crisis is upon us because our constitution never catered for an individual or entity that would disregard every signpost, every option or route, and ignore them all. We have ignored so many of what the Constitution says to do. We have no answer in the Constitution anymore. There is an adage, the law was never made for madmen. And I don't mean to impute anything in relation to the president, but what that's saying really means is laws are designed to correct your behavior and to say what you must do to comply. It is not designed for you when you are determined to do what you want, because you will breach all of the laws. If you breach one or you breach 500, it's still breach and you will proceed. But my thing is, what will happen is, of course, we're not going to be without a president because a vacuum can't be created. If that vacuum were to be created, there are interesting things that are in Article 94, 95 of our Constitution that relates to the removal of the president for the breach of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. It relates to the existence of a parliament and things like that, and then the chancellor will take over.
Right.
But that will only engender more litigation, more mayhem.
Correct.
At some point in time, civilized societies, if these disputes are not solved in a civilized way by a judicial system, it will be solved in a primitive way, the way barbarians did on the streets. It is my sincere hope that that doesn't happen. But after the 18th, which is when the time runs out, if Parliament doesn't correct it, and from all indications, the opposition leader has made clear he's not going back to Parliament, then this government is without lawful authority. That's what has happened to them.
So let's pick up the conversation. Let's take a little break and we'll come back. And I'm going to predict to you both that I believe within the next 3 days the president will call elections. But let's take a quick break and we'll come back.
I pray that you're right.
L'Amour is helping to sponsor Globespan 24/7 programs. L'Amour will be celebrating Diwali on board the Princess Luxury Yacht with a cruise on October 19th at 6:30 p.m. Take a cruise down the Hudson with non-stop Diwali celebrations plus DJ and fashion show. Tickets start from $75. That's a Diwali cruise on board the Princess Yacht on October 19th at 6:30 p.m. Call Angeli at 845-545-9936. or Shika at 646-732-0065.
Thank you. Kamal, I want to come to you on, as we resume here now. The cabinet vis-a-vis president, government, contracts that would be signed and business that would be executed by the government of Guyana. Are there any legal steps that can be taken against members of the cabinet for these decisions that they're now taking that might deem to be unconstitutional? Because if they're not constitutional, they ought to have resigned. Then can legal steps be taken against them post-elections or at any time in the future?
I'm not sure how successful such action would be, because when you go past a certain stage and stop governing in accordance with the rule book, stop governing in accordance with the constitution, then it's like if a strong man is in power. I don't want to say a dictator, but someone who is holding power by means which are not necessarily democratic means. Now, I know that it can be said that the government won elections and they came into power lawfully, and their term was for 5 years, which ends next year. That is so. But the people elected their representatives to parliament, and that parliament decided it had no confidence in the government on the 21st of December 2018. And on the 21st of December 2018, a certain procedure was triggered. Elections in 3 months or an extension. That never happened. So the fact that they were lawfully elected for a period came to an end and something else overtook it. So when I say that, well, according to the CCJ, the additional 3 months will expire on the 18th of September. And after the 18th of September, if none of these things have happened, then it is as if the country is being run by a strong man. Now, that said, whether contracts and so on will be unlawful and actions can be taken against ministers of government, I would not be able to say. You will recall that during the period 1968 to 1992, there were rigged elections. But we did have a government in place, and that government did lots of things, and it was recognized as the government of Guyana by foreign countries. So it's not an easy situation to say yes or no, contracts will become illegal. What we will have, however, is a government which is not a democratic government.
Correct. Sanjeev, let me ask. Yes, go on.
About that, the Caribbean Court of Justice in a case that came from Belize, in a majority decision, had said that if a public official spends for his own benefit or without lawful authority the public funds to which he is charged with, I'm telling you what my interpretation. If you are in office, you must conduct yourself accordingly. We have heard misconduct and misfeasance in public office a lot recently. You are obligated as a public official to conduct yourselves in accordance to that. And the Caribbean Court of Justice in that case from Belize, by a majority decision, did say that you could take proceedings against a government official who has, without authority or for his own interest, taken action as a public official. Now, in these current circumstances, I guess the challenge will be that the president is directing what is going on. He might enjoy immunity from suit, but his ministers wouldn't, because they are carrying out public functions.
Correct.
So
but
it would
be
a messy situation.
Doesn't Kamal have a point that if you look at the pre-1992 years, there was a government, albeit under questionable elections, and they were never taken to court for any decisions that the ministers took.
Thankfully, the world has changed.
This is a different time now, though, Yog. Different time.
Public law, which has moved to be the fastest growing area of law that holds governments accountable. In the 1970s, even up to the 1990s, courts were not ready to countenance that. But now we have a court in England telling the Prime Minister of England that we believe that your motives are improper and we will not allow you to prorogue Parliament.
Correct.
So the examination of the public officials' actions is now much wider.
Got you. So Kamal and Sanjeev, you both have taken this journey to CCJ on the same matter, this whole constitutional matter, representing your different clients. You would have therefore done extensive research of many, many countries that have similar constitutions as Ghana. Is there in your research any other country that might have had a similar situation and similar that you can draw from?
In Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, there was a unilateral declaration of independence. I believe it was 1980, and they had something similar to what we went through. And the local courts, even the Privy Council, they didn't act as strongly as they could have done. And again, in Grenada, I think it was in 1983, there was the issue of revolutionary legality. The government had been overthrown by Maurice Bishop, and then it was overthrown again. And so there was that issue of revolutionary legality. Both of those cases, I don't believe that the courts went as far as they could have gone. And likewise, in Guyana, in the Caribbean Court of Justice, the court expects that people will obey the Constitution. Maybe it can't conceive that a government could possibly not obey the clear, explicit terms of the Constitution.
Correct. In fact, let me chip in to quote paragraph 7 of its judgment. CCJ stated that it is expected, the court assumes that these bodies and personages, that is GCOM, President and National Assembly, will, quote, exercise their responsibility with integrity and keeping with the unambiguous provisions of the Constitution, unquote. Back to you.
Well, clearly they didn't know what was happening in Guyana. It's unfortunate that we can't go back. The case is at an end.
Correct.
It's unfortunate that that was not to be the position. We knew that. Sanjeev and I knew what would have happened unless the politicians in Guyana are told explicitly, you have to do this or there will be consequences. They will not do it. They're not going to agree on anything. They're not going to abide if there is some loophole or not even a loophole, something that they can say that is a reason for not obeying it. So it's unfortunate, and hopefully one day it will change.
Yog, we must expect better of our leaders. This is not an issue of which party you support.
Correct.
I mean, I hear conversations from educated people who are pro-government, who say things like, why do we have to keep going to court all the time? You're being a vexatious litigant. People are saying, why can't you just leave it alone? It's because the truth is that if you just leave it alone, there appears to be no hope of obedience. This is nothing to do with whether you're entitled to a term in Parliament or whether you should get your 5 years. The rules are the only thing, because when all else fails, it is only the rules and the laws that will protect us. If you were to reverse this, when you look at countries that fail, it's a clear eroding of laws that takes place before that country gets to be a failed state.
Correct.
And we have to realize that no one man, no one party, no entity is worth that. We have all of the wealth promised to the Guyana citizens of what may happen with petroleum. But I assure you, while this fight is going on, they built Lisa Destiny. They're drilling wells. They brought Lisa Destiny. It's going to be anchored. They're drilling more wells. We're still trying to fight about why can't you obey 4 lines in a constitution?
Correct. In fact, last week we had an interesting discussion with Basil Pandey and Kevin Ramkarran, and it was said on that forum that we don't have local content policy here. We don't have the relevant regulatory and legislative stuff in place for oil, and first oil are months away, weeks away, and meanwhile this is all happening with this political stalemate. It means what will happen is that the investors are just going to cream everything and run away with it, and we're going to be 5 years behind.
Well, you didn't need to say we didn't have local content. We didn't. Yog, we have nothing.
That's true.
It's not an exaggeration. It is not a misstatement. We have an Exploration Act, which is from the 1990s.
Correct.
We don't have a Production Act. We don't have anything that says what should happen. We have no regulations. We have no policy. We have no capacity, no rules. It is not an overstatement that we have nothing.
Thank you. Well, thank you for making that very clear. On one hand, we spoke about what recourse we have against GCOM, against the government, and on the other hand, if, as you said, the government might want to go back to Parliament, and one wonders whether the Speaker himself of Parliament cannot now say, well, there will be no Parliament because of all this that's happening. But I'm not going to ask you to answer on that. But here is the question, the last question I'm going to have before we go to your closing comments. There are lots of people across this country that may be at various levels of education and politics and everything else. What I know is this is a hard question, Kamal and Sanjeev. What can we say to the regular man in the street that is probably seeing all this thing as PPP versus PNC or Indo-Guyanese versus another set of Guyanese or something like that? What can we say to these people? And also on the other side of the paradigm, what can we say, as I asked last week, to make the blind see and the deaf hear in terms of the ABC countries and the Commonwealth?
Well,
go on.
What we should say is simple. If we all are made to obey the rules, it doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter what your party is.
That's right.
But the rules bring predictability. We know that if this happens, this will follow. Uncertainty is the bedfellow of corruption, because what happens is it's made up as we go along.
Correct.
You have individuals who have the power to say, instead of going left, we go right. That's how corruption is born, that's how it's bred, and that's how it's grown into a man. Because everyone has a decision to make, and it's up to their discretion. They're all little Caesars. Now, if we have rules, if we have a constitution, and if we want to have a fair playing field for all, then we must obey it. It doesn't matter coming up with flimsy excuses or emotive reasons. Charan Das and his character is irrelevant. The rules that we all play by says this is what you should do. Don't complain about it. You are a leader. Leaders must do what they must do to ensure that the other people, how could we have a president who does not want to obey the Constitution? Then why would a citizen need to pay his taxes? Why would you need to obey the roads of traffic?
Absolutely.
Why would any other citizen, what would be the incentive for him to be a good citizen?
Correct. Thank you. Kama, any words from you on that?
Well,
in terms of the ABC countries especially, and the Commonwealth and so forth.
Well, Yoga, I'm extremely surprised that people are saying nothing. Ramatar prorogued the parliament, which is something that the constitution permits, and there was a huge outcry.
Correct.
While I'm not saying that it was correct or democratic for him to do so and to keep it prorogued for 6 months, there was a huge outcry then. And why is there no outcry now? I simply can't understand it. What could be behind it? All of a sudden, people started respecting Guyana's sovereignty. But this is not just an issue of sovereignty. Every country in this world now has to operate by democratic principles and adhere to the rule of law. And any country which does not do so earns a rebuke from the rest of the world. And we've seen it over and over and over again.
Correct.
So why is it that the people who are seeing quite clearly, because this is not something that is ambiguous or something that's unclear or something that needs careful study to understand. This is something that's clear and in front of the world.
Correct.
Why is it that we're allowed to do this? There's a traffic light right outside my house, and you see what happens when it is not obeyed. There are consequences to disobeying the law. You see it quite clearly. In that case, people hit into one another. So
Correct.
it's clear there. In this case, there are also consequences of not obeying the law.
Correct.
What will happen is that we will no longer be regarded as a democratic country. If oil makes that all better, well, I don't know. I would like to live in a democratic country.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you both. Just 30 seconds. Sanjeev, any closing thoughts from you?
I think that it's important that we as a nation wake up. We can't continue to just say things for the sake of interest and say things and mislead people. 33 is a majority of 65. We didn't need 6 months in a court to tell us that. We don't need house-to-house registration. It's not provided for by our law. We don't have 200,000 extra people on the voters list. These are things that are inflammatory, that could incite a nation, a people to believe they're disenfranchised. Tell the truth. The GCOM CEO came out and he said he doesn't know where those things came from. He doesn't understand why they say that. But
Correct.
we also have to realize that we can't just continue to try to mislead people, to deceive people, so that our own self-interest is served. We have to demand better from our leaders. We must.
That's right. Thank you. Kamal, any closing words from you? 30 seconds.
Yo, I keep hoping that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Like you said, the president's going to call elections in the next 2 days. I keep hoping that we can somehow get back to obeying the terms of the Constitution and putting this sordid affair behind us. Let us have elections. Whoever wins elections doesn't matter to me. Whoever wins elections, we have elections and we move forward and obey the Constitution and adhere to the rule of law and return to our proper position as a democratic country. I hope that is going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you both. And just before we close, I had asked a trivia question at the beginning, at the start of our program. Who said the following words? The president is sleepwalking into a constitutional crisis. I noticed that viewers have all voted Barrett Jagdeo 41%, David Granger 46%, none of the above 14%. Actually, these words are attributed to David Granger in 2014, speaking of the Donald Ramotar presidency. Then he said, Granger had said, the president is sleepwalking into a constitutional crisis. Sanjeev, thank you so very much. Kamal,
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank Globespan
Thank you
for
for
having
having
us on
us.
board. Thank you. And thank Devin, our technical guy, and all of our viewers. Thank you and see you soon. To all of Guyana, I am sure we got good news coming up in the near future. Let's be positive.
I
Thank
hope
you
so.
all.
Good night.
Good night.